Welcome everyone to the Society for Science at User Research Facilities webinar on cyber-espionage and intellectual property theft and technology transfer. I'm Dan Powers, Executive Director at SURF, and I'm grateful to welcome our guest, Scott McGaunn, an expert with insights and details on this topic. Before I introduce Scott, a few sentences about the Society for Science at User Research Facilities. Our mission is to provide a consolidated voice for those engaged in, supporting, and or interested in research conducted by the nation's national laboratory user facilities. And our member facilities are globally renowned as the most specialized, brilliant network of fundamental scientific research laboratories available to the most visionary scientists across the globe. As part of our mission, we provide best practice webinars and communications, and today's webinar is right in that vein of activity, where we hope that following this presentation, further conversations are prompted within your facilities and amongst your network as to steps that should be taken. And if you're interested further in helping set up some of these webinars with particular topics, we have several committees with SURF. And if you're interested in chipping in, we have of course, the Government Affairs Committee and Communications Committee, the User Administrators Committees, and if you'd like to be part of developing our programs, please reach me, dan.powers@surf.org is my email. That's 2 S's in SURF. All right, for today's presentation, please enter your comments and questions into the chat, and I'll moderate those. And yes, this will be recorded and made available via our social media feed for you to share and watch again. I'll also send out a link directly to everyone who's RSVP'd, so you could get this. I'll have that by tomorrow afternoon. All right, so let's get to this. Let me introduce our speaker today. Scott McGaunn has been a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the past 25 years. He's investigated white-collar crime and the Russian mafia while stationed in San Francisco, and the Italian mafia families while stationed in New York City. He spent 6 years on the Boston FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force and 12 years investigating cyber criminals, intellectual property violations, and corporate espionage in New York and Boston. Most recently, Special Agent McGann was assigned to the Counterintelligence Division, where he works on national security matters and speaks publicly on behalf of the Boston FBI. He's also an FBI certified firearms instructor, a member of the FBI's evidence response team, a certified police instructor, an FBI adjunct facility member, where he teaches crime scene management domestically and internationally. Scott was stationed in New York for 9/11, and he lived in a safe house with the boss of the real-life Sopranos family, while he worked on crime scene the crime scene on Boylston Street in Boston for the marathon bombing, among other notable assignments. He was nominated for the 2018 Attorney General's Award for Fraud Prevention, and in addition, he was nominated for the 2018 FBI Director's Award for Outstanding Criminal Investigation for his involvement in international corporate espionage investigation, which is soon to be the subject of a television documentary on Chinese corporate espionage. And then a little bit of slight background, Scott. It's typical for biographies, but that you received your undergraduate degree from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, his master's in criminal justice from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and his MBA from Bentley University. And he currently teaches issues in cybercrime and cybersecurity as adjunct facility at UMass. Today, he's going to discuss the FBI's counterintelligence efforts against America's adversaries, the nature of espionage as it relates to the theft of intellectual property at research institutes, and the challenges of illegitimate transfer of technologies to antagonistic nations. So Scott, over to you. You have the screen share control.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Dan. And thank you all for having me here. As you can tell from that very brief introduction, that I've been around the Bureau for quite a while, and be 26 years shortly, and have seen a great number of things. Primarily in the last decade or so, I've become much more involved in corporate espionage and technology transfer And in the FBI, we generally use the phrase technology transfer in the pejorative sense, in that we find it being stolen quite a bit. I recently was using that same phrase at another conference, and full of technology transfer experts, and they viewed technology transfer as a good thing. And so we were kind of talking at cross purposes there for a moment before we got our facts set straight, which was kind of funny. But I've been around for a while. I have a lot of information to share. If you have, at the end of this presentation, just general questions about the FBI in general, I am authorized to speak on a number of different subjects. So I'd be happy to answer your questions or satisfy your curiosity to that extent. So with all that being said, let me just share my screen here. May take a second. Okay.
And Scott, this is Dan. I'll just jump in quick. For you viewing any of our guests, if you select under view option, speaker view, I believe that will make the screen as large as possible for that, and you won't have to see certainly not see my face, but Scott's would be made smaller. Thanks.
Which might be a godsend to some people. And with the larger screen, I may not have to use these. So let me just say, I've been talking a lot this past year about research at different entities. I speak a lot in academic environments. I am located in the Boston area. As such, we are a target-rich environment for our adversaries, as we generically call them, people who would want to steal the intellectual capital of the United States. And that's something that we in the counterintelligence division of the FBI are interested in preventing. And so that's where a lot of our efforts go. So when I talk about our adversaries, generally I'm talking about different nation states, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But as part of and parcel of what I like to talk about is that we're not looking to shut down research facilities from working with other people in other countries and collaborating in those different environments, whether they be research institutes or academic environments. And the FBI certainly recognizes that the collaboration between different countries and entities is vital to forwarding research in many different areas. Having said all that, we also recognize that we do have adversaries out there, and we do have people, as evidenced by hundreds and thousands of cases of intellectual property theft. We have people out there who are interested in stealing the intellectual capital of our neighbors and our countrymen. And I take this kind of personally because I spent a number of years of my life on a case where a company was almost, excuse me, destroyed by the theft of their intellectual property. So having said that, let's move on to the presentation. We've seen throughout the past couple of years the headlines of people being used by other governments and working with other governments, particularly in the research field, various fields within the research industry, I should say, to a great extent in academia, where folks have been doing research in this area. Particularly, I talk about just in the Boston area, and certainly it's been all around the country. And you see the headlines where people, professors, researchers have been usurped by primarily, in our cases, in the majority of our cases, through entities tied to the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Republic of China, and certainly there are others, of course. And one of the issues for us is that a lot of the research being conducted is conducted at the behest of the American people through their tax dollars, through the different entities you see on the screen now. The research industry in the Massachusetts area gets $3 billion, which is a large portion of the grants that are donated by the federal government to various research efforts in our area. So the US government likes to make sure that the taxpayers are getting their money's worth and that foreign governments are not reaping the rewards of the research being done around here at taxpayer expense. And I talk a lot about China, so let me be upfront and talk to, regarding, I think our director says it best here in his quote that you can read yourself. But we're not talking about the Chinese people in general, certainly not talking about Chinese Americans. And this goes same for Russia, Iran, all either naturalized US citizens of those backgrounds. What I do want to say is that we were talking about the People's Republic of, the Chinese Communist Party in particular, and their agents when we talk about China, and the same thing goes with the other countries, that we are talking about people and governments that are particularly bent on hurting our nation and making gains to our detriment. And Chris Ray puts it nicely here, as you've read. One of the things that I like to put into context, I've heard it earlier when I started speaking publicly a year or so ago. People would say, why are you picking on China? And I found this graphic, which I think is interesting to an extent. The world's chart of GDP as it goes through the past couple thousand years. And you can imagine, knowing your history, that ancient China, ancient India, some of the areas around ancient Greece were the world powers way, way back centuries ago. And that has changed certainly over time, and certainly with the advent of the United States and the United States coming to the fore, taking GDP away from those other nations. And now, as of the past couple of decades, that has certainly begun to shift. It's certainly shifting to the betterment of China. And keep this in mind as you look at this next slide, where you look at the percentage of counterintelligence cases that are being worked at the FBI. And the thing that's most amazing to me about this slide is that it's actually unclassified, and I'm actually able to show it to you. In years past, it's just inconceivable that we would talk about numbers as related to counterintelligence cases with the US government and the FBI in particular in a public forum. So I think that just underscores the nature of transparency and what we're trying to do in sharing with the public. You'll see here that roughly over 20% of the FBI counterintelligence cases revolved around China 20 years ago. And now that has certainly changed to over 40% of our caseload. That in itself is amazing. And the other thing I take from this chart is I look at this yellow line up here. Back in 2000, we had a number of cases with this particular country. And for those who are not, or who are among the uninitiated, we do our counterintelligence by country. So we have squads that are the China squad, the Russian squad, et cetera, et cetera. And in this case, in the case of the yellow line, those of you who are students of more recent history would recognize that those are cases regarding Iraq. And over the course of time, that has decreased until it's barely a blip on the board. So for me, this shows that we go where the cases are. And so that we're not just picking on any particular country, but actually the evidence dictates that that is where we should put our efforts. And along with those two charts, we also see that cases on technology transfer have increased from about 2% to 1/3 of all of our counterintelligence cases. So this is economic espionage, this is counterproliferation cases, and the illegal transfer of technology and investigations surrounding that. All our other counterintelligence cases, which we would consider traditional, have changed, especially over the last decade. And we're doing more and more technology transfer investigations. Like I said, about a third of what we do on the counterintelligence side of the house. So just damning statistics as far as talking about intellectual property theft and the transfer of technology to other countries, specifically our adversaries. And here, I like this slide because it's Dr. Michael Lowell at the top there from the National Institutes of Health. We don't target people because of where they're from. We don't target them because of who they are. We target them because they are stealing and breaking the law. And just at NIH, they've shared these statistics with us that they investigated 190 scientists at a number of different institutions with regards to influence on research from foreign entities. And many of them had undisclosed foreign grants, undisclosed talent awards. For those of you who haven't heard of that, we'll talk about that briefly in a moment. People were working with undisclosed contracts with foreign companies. And as a result of that, there were a number of resignations and terminations. And these are from people who are well-funded. And you'll see examples of why they would be involved with foreign governments in a few moments. But they also use a number of different techniques, these foreign governments. They use different techniques that may not be illegal in this country. Certainly, if you look at this icon on the right, science and technology investments aren't illegal. Doing research partnerships, that's not illegal. But through those partnerships, our foreign adversaries gain knowledge, awareness, and a foothold with people here in this country. We talk a lot about non-traditional collectors, which you see at the top of that icon. Non-traditional collectors are people who have access. These aren't traditional spies. These aren't people who are trained by intelligence services or their contacts and sources in this country. These are people who simply have access. They can be diplomats, they can be business people, they can be scientists, fellow researchers, they can almost be anybody. And I've actually seen in one particular case earlier in my career where this ended up being a caterer who was doing one of the first economic espionage cases under the 1996 economic espionage law. One of the first people charged with that was a caterer. So it can be literally anybody. And in doing these collaborations with research entities, with academic institutions, these countries certainly gain a foothold into ours and into that intellectual property development. Certainly, we have students being developed in other countries. Glenn Duffy Shriver was a student here who was influenced by intelligence officers while working and living over in China. He came back and unfortunately for him, tried to apply for a position with the federal government. I think the polygraph stopped him, and he admitted to what he had done. He had taken $70,000, met with handlers in China, and his experience was dramatized in a movie that was made by the FBI's counterintelligence unit, which we've shown around the country many times. You can also see this on YouTube, called Game of Pawns. And certainly he was just a young pawn in the great game of espionage. We've seen here locally in the Boston area, Harvard's department chair, Dr. Lieber here. Charles Lieber was arrested by myself and some of my colleagues last January, just over a year ago, here in Cambridge at his office. He was charged with making false statements to DOD investigators, which in my experience is a fairly light charge. Those charges were later superseded with more serious charges. He was alleged, as this case is ongoing, to be involved with the China's 1,000 Talents program. For those of you who haven't heard of talent programs, China is certainly not the only country to have them, but Russia has them as well as other countries, where essentially the services of experts, subject matter experts in various fields, are purchased by foreign governments, and they are brought into their talent program stable, if you would. Talent programs aren't illegal. If you want to be part of a talent program, that's just fine. If a foreign country will pay you to be a subject matter expert, that's great. Again, not illegal. However, if you don't report that and you're receiving millions of dollars in funding from the federal government does not look kindly on that, especially when someone like Dr. Lieber, who's an expert in nanoscience, would be talking specifically about things that in the nanoscience field that he likely researched using government dollars and taxpayer dollars. So that is certainly frowned upon by the US government. And when you lie about those things, the FBI tends to come knocking. I will tell you, Dr. Lieber, of course, was shocked to see us in the morning early. And however, he was not surprised. You can see here in the next slide, this is part of the affidavit, which is public knowledge, that he was paid $50,000 a month in salary, plus an extra $150,000 a year kicker for personal expenses through the Wuhan University of Technology, WUT. He was also given more than $1.5 million by WUT to open a lab and conduct research in China. So what research do you think he was talking about when he was over in China? Certainly, it was probably things that he had learned over the past decade regarding nanoscience that was partially funded by the US government. So therein lies the problem. Here also in the Boston area at Boston University, we had Miss Ye. Miss Ye was a member of the People's Liberation Army, a lieutenant. She had studied at one of their better military academies over there for the Chinese Communist Party. We issued a warrant for her arrest for acting as an agent of a foreign government. She unfortunately was able to skip town and get out of Dodge before she was able to be arrested, and she returned back to her country of origin. This was somebody posing as a student who was tasked by her handlers to gather information in and about Boston University and the area on a number of different topics. So when you think back to that icon of different techniques, she was a trained spy, if you would, being tasked by handlers for the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. When we talk about non-traditional collectors, Mr. Zhang here, only 29 years old, a medical student also here in Boston, was discovered to be smuggling biological material out from a lab that he worked at Beth Israel, and he had vials wrapped up in his sock. I'm convinced that there are other methods for transferring biological material out of the country rather than wrapping them up in your sock and stuffing them in your luggage. However, he did not want to avail himself of those methodologies. He also duplicated a colleague's work when he saw this product his colleague had made, duplicated it and took it out of the lab without any authorization. He was caught at Logan Airport when his luggage was searched and they found the biological materials. What is most interesting for the audience here today is that during a 6-month period, he was one of only 30 people that we caught just at Logan Airport doing exactly the same thing. So think about that. When I think about the wholesale theft of intellectual property or intellectual capital, if you would, from this country, I think of these incidents where people are smuggling biologicals in this particular industry out of hospitals and universities in this area and taking them back. In this case, in every single one of those 30 cases, it was back to China. And in one of those other cases, one of the 30, we had recorded one of the individuals saying, hey, look, if this doesn't work out for us back in China, we'll just come back here to America and steal some more and then bring it back and try to make our millions that way, was effectively what he was saying. So this is a non-traditional collector. So this is somebody who's not doing it at the behest of the Chinese government, but he certainly knows that he will be welcome and indeed protected, as is their law over in China. Their 2017 state security law says that they will protect people if they are bringing information back to the home country that is in the interest of national security, which also means military and economic security from their standpoint. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Also, we have corporate espionage examples in this immediate area. This is Sam Strafacci. Sam's a great guy, has spoken on for the FBI on a number of different occasions. He had someone come into his company on a very interesting day, and it was, all we can tell is that it was particularly fortuitous for the spy that tried to come into his company. Sam had one of MedRobotics' medical devices approved by a federal authority that day. And so Sam took his credit card, gave it to his vice president, and told him to take the company out to go have a number of different beverages at the local watering hole. I don't know if this is a practice with CEOs around the country, but Sam decided to do it that day. However, he stayed behind to prepare a report for the board. As is usual, he's the first one in, last one out at his company. Came out of there at about 7:30 at night, looked in the glass enclosed conference room that was in his lobby, and saw someone behind a laptop with just their hair showing. And he saw this black head of hair and said, "Excuse me, sir, can I help you?" And the individual said, "Yes," or excuse me, said, "No, I'm waiting for a meeting with the CEO, late night meeting." And Sam said, "Well, I'm the CEO, so I know that's not true. What are you doing?" And he tried to make some excuses about meeting other people, the names. He was ripping off an internet page that he had up on one of his laptops. And all those people he was talking about meeting were stationed in Europe. So Sam knew that he had a problem. He called the local police, and Sam's a very large man and a very intimidating presence, despite the smiling picture you see on the screen here. And that person sat still when Sam told him to, and he called the local police. It turned out that this Mr. Liu was interviewed by the local officer who had never had a case on corporate espionage and was arrested later that evening. They sat and questioned him for a while. Turned out he had come from China, flown to Canada, driven down from Canada across the US border, driven down to Waltham, and set up shop in the public space of the company that he was trying to hack into. This made MedRobotics look at their security procedures, and had Sam not come out, an hour later, the cleaning crew would have come in. They wouldn't have questioned this guy, and they ran their electrical cord for their vacuum through the lobby into the locked area of the establishment, into the lab, basically. So this guy would have been able to steal prototypes, put malware on their servers. He could have done whatever he wanted because he would have had physical access. As it was, he was trying to hack into their network externally from their lobby and couldn't do that. So anyhow, he was arrested on corporate espionage charges. Locally here, also in Massachusetts, I like to talk about this case a great deal. Some of you may have heard that Sinovel Wind Group versus the United States was a case here where American Superconductor lost most of its market cap, $1.4 billion in market cap. They were a company on the rise and were effectively destroyed because someone had gotten their source code and given it to their main customer and competitor, Sinovel, a Chinese company. And so what ended up happening here, and I could go into this case in great detail because it was actually my case, but the long story short is after 7 years of investigation and primarily adjudication, they were indicted after a year or two of investigation. The company was indicted as a whole, along with a couple of employees who were specifically involved in flipping an insider at American Superconductor. And the insider here is Dejan Karabasevec. He's a former employee who was stationed in Austria for American Superconductor. He was flipped with a combination of a classic insider threat story, but basically was flipped over to the other side with the use of lots of money and sexual favors from some of their employees, a technique in the espionage game that still works. And they are all the three principal people who were indicted here. Karabasevec, Miss Sue, who is of Sinovel, she was their research and marketing director, and also threw her all into the case with Mr. Karabasevec, and Mr. Zhao here, who is a field tech who helped test and procure the source code for Sinovel, as well as the Sinovel Wind Group, the company in general. These three are fugitives currently. Sinovel paid $57.5 million in cash to American Superconductor. And as you'll see from the last bullet here, it's going to be made into a documentary movie because the case was just so interesting. And there was some crazy, sneaky stuff done. And there was a lot of spy versus spy stuff. So very interesting case, one that's very local here, and one that clearly shows that our foreign competitors are doing espionage in this area with the assistance of their governments. So we do find often that intelligence agents recruit researchers at different companies, recruit academics to get information and to get access. And a lot of times those are those non-traditional collectors who sometimes collect on their own behalf because they know information is worth money to competitors and to other governments. We found that people will figure that out and become brokers of information and effectively become spies in place. Intelligence agents will actively recruit people. That's their job. And they also do it here on foreign soil, on our soil as well as foreign soil. So if researchers are traveling to other countries, we do travel briefs for people traveling overseas, going to conferences where people will be bumped by foreign entities. They may look like other product salesmen, they may look like other researchers, but they are working for other intelligence agencies, and we certainly see that. And we also see more and more that contact with foreign intelligence agencies are being made through the use of professional networking sites. So LinkedIn is the intelligence officer's new best friend. And I say this with a great deal of confidence because, as you can see here, this is my LinkedIn page. So as I said, I'm getting to the end of my career. I'll be punching out of here in probably the not too distant future and looking for another career. My colleagues who have already punched out have told me you're nobody if you're not on LinkedIn. And so I have no social media presence. And so finally I said, okay, I acquiesce and I put up a LinkedIn page, which everybody who's watching this probably has. And of course, I get hit up here by Mandy Zhang, who is a global recruiting expert for TikTok. And of course, TikTok is the US government, not very enamored with TikTok as of late. So I, of course, ignored this. I was thinking, though, for a moment that I may connect with Mandy, because as she says down here, the culture there at TikTok is magical. So it's certainly got that going for it. But nonetheless, I decided I'll just screenshot this and use it in my lectures down the road to give the example of foreign entities reaching out to people on LinkedIn. What was more interesting about this was not that Mandy, who has absolutely no business contacting an FBI agent over in the United States, not only is that something that she has no business doing, but also shortly thereafter, after I ignored this request, my two young sons, who are young men in their early 20s, were hit up by all these Asian women on their social media, all these Asian women from Texas. And they are certainly not against meeting beautiful women online, being young American men. But of course, being the sons of FBI agents, came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, we're getting hit up on LinkedIn by all these people. Is that because of you?" And yeah, it is. Thank you, son, for noticing that. And so they just ignored those requests as well. So the last point I can make with regards to LinkedIn is that you will be contacted if you are in the research industry by foreign entities. And what also will be done, for your knowledge, is that foreign entities will contact people at your company to talk about business deals, like your CEO or CFO or CISO, and will say, "Hey, we're coming there to your country. We're meeting with some companies because we have this product we want to sell, or this joint venture we want to talk to you about. How about if we meet at 11 o'clock next week and we talk with your CEO about this?" And so maybe it sounds good. Whoever's in charge will set up the meeting. In the meantime, what they'll do is they'll look on LinkedIn for people who look like their countrymen. And they'll say, "Hey, countrymen, we're going to be there meeting with your CEO on this joint venture. Why don't we get together for lunch after the meeting and we'll talk about events at home?" And so what they're doing is finding people within the company that they can flip to be insiders. And they're using the bogus meeting with the CEO as top cover for that. So be aware that that technique is out there. And we've seen that on 2 occasions here in my local area. With regard to protecting your research, we talk a lot about compliance, but all of you have heard over and over again from security people and compliance folks about strong compliance management programs and making sure all the right paperwork is in order. We talk more on the training side, and that's why I like to come out and talk to researchers and academic institutions about some of the threats that are out there. I'm with the FBI, we talk about threats. And so that they can make better decisions and kind of round out that training with real world examples, as I've given you here. A lot of what I talk about is simply engaging with the FBI. I was on a meeting today with a number of professors, like 30 different ones, over at Harvard University, a prominent university and research institution here in my local area, and sharing information about their research in China. It was not always a calm discussion because a lot of people really enjoy their foreign research and have had decades-long partnerships with people. And they look at the FBI talking about some of these partnerships disparagingly, and with examples of partnerships going bad, they look at that in a serious light. So, but the important thing, and the important thing I told them this morning, is to continue to be engaged. Wherever you are, there is a local FBI. I'm in Boston. If you're in Denver, if you're anywhere else on the planet, mostly, there's an FBI agent somewhere out there who you can engage with. They are called private sector coordinators. That's their title. So if you call the local FBI and say, who is your private sector coordinator? They are somebody who can come to your local institution and talk about similar things as I'm talking about today on a number of different subjects as well: foreign travel, counterintelligence, terrorism, ransomware and business email compromise are popular subjects now. Talk about going over to overseas conferences, cybercrime. They can talk about a whole number of different subjects. So I would urge you to be proactive and engage with them. If something happens, as say there's a ransomware attack, what we try to do is get in front of that and prepare people for the event of a ransomware. But calling the FBI when a ransomware attack is going on isn't going to help you in the moment, because we're investigators, and it's going to take weeks, if not months, to figure out who is doing that ransomware attack. But that doesn't help you at the moment. So the FBI, the private sector coordinators, they can help you develop realistic expectations of what they can and can't do as well on a local level. So I encourage you to engage with them, engage with your local office proactively. We have a number of different organizations. If your company wants to get involved with the FBI, we have something we call the Domestic Security Alliance Council for corporations that want to be involved with the Bureau. For those of you in the federal government, you're automatically friends of ours, so you can just call up your local FBI and just talk to that private sector coordinator, because we're able to brief research facilities, academia, students, faculty, companies. We will go anywhere and give our message to people so that they can be forewarned and forearmed as far as protecting our intellectual capital and our research out there. I wanted to leave some time for questions, so please feel free. I'll stop sharing this at the moment, and I guess we'll look at the chat, Dan.
Yes, let me get off of mute here. Okay. So yes, actually, we do have a few questions that have come in. And actually, this isn't the like required protocol, but I wanted to bring on to the screen our board chair from the Society for Science at User Research Facilities, Jason Benedict. He had a question, and I think it'll be helpful if, or at least he was willing to come on screen. So just a moment while I bring him up here, and I'll prompt you. It has to do with, let me do this here. It has to do with cryptocurrency.
Oh, I see it. I see it.
Let's see. Let me allow you to talk, Jason. Here
okay.
we go. All right. So your voice is on screen here.
All right. Yeah, it looks like we won't have a camera, but that's all right. Scott, thank you. Really interesting talk. A little, worrisome at times. So I'm actually also an associate professor of chemistry at the University at Buffalo. So, when you're talking about the academic side of things, I can certainly relate. My question, though, is actually about, cryptocurrency, and, this is, splashing all over the news and such. And I'm just wondering, what sort of a role cryptocurrency might play in, espionage, and if that's sort of a, an evolving thing. And then also, one reason for asking is, China seems, at least based on the headlines, China seems to be rather hostile towards cryptocurrencies, which, if these were an effective tool for, assisting or facilitating espionage, I find it sort of a strange position to take. But I was just wondering if you could sort of maybe comment on that area a little bit.
Sure. As far as your first question, cryptocurrency and espionage, does it play a role? Absolutely. the nature of the game in espionage is not to be caught and to hide yourself. So as particularly every country with cyber espionage uses cryptocurrency in order to pay for the infrastructure. So you need routers, you need computers, you need virtual private servers, you need to obfuscate your IP address, you need to be a spy and not be recognized, or at least to falsify your identity or your country of origin often. So cryptocurrency definitely plays a role in that, as you know, because spies have to gather infrastructure to do their deeds. So in order to break into a system, I need something that's unattributable to me if I'm China or Russia or Iran or Iceland or, you know, whoever. So definitely cryptocurrency plays a role. And as regards to the second part, not official FBI doctrine here coming out of my mouth next, but my guess is cryptocurrency within society does not provide for additional control. We can control our currency, we can control things to a certain extent in the market through monetary policy. When cryptocurrency is out there in the wild, I have a feeling that there is a lack of control. And my guess and my observations over the past few decades is China likes to have control. And monetary policy is another area where they can provide sway to their population. So as the US government's dollar declines as a percentage of our dollars are being used primarily by other nations as a measure of health for currency, and it's declining. I think 59 point something % of the dollars utilized in the world are American, or money utilized in the world are American. European Union, the pound over there is, or the euro, excuse me, over there is increasing in its prevalence. Having cryptocurrency in the mix adds a level of lack of control, and that's my guess. I hope that answers your question, Jason.
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's pretty wild stuff, and who knows if you know, these governments may, you know, like you say, sort of, you know, be somewhat reluctant to bring it in socially, but maintain it as a tool in their own arsenal for doing stuff like this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and again, not speaking for the FBI, but those are my observations. So we don't have an official policy on that.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So we have several questions that are coming in here. How about, you had mentioned handlers a couple of times, and wondering, are these handlers stateside or abroad? Do handlers handle more than one spy at a time? And actually, are FBI agents ever arrested? This is a whole...
I have a colleague who can't go to Russia anymore. So,
all right.
So are they arrested? No, not really. Hopefully they don't put themselves in a position where they can be. I think, though, what you're referring to is us handling spies. We handle sources, which we call confidential human sources, or CHSs. Just like police departments all over the world do. They have sources of information. We have our own sources. There is a huge manual that you have to drill down through of steps you have to take before those sources can operate in specific environments or overseas. It's highly, there's a great level of oversight into that, a great number of regulations regarding that. Intelligence agencies, say, if you're thinking the CIA, their job is to handle sources overseas. And remember, everything they do overseas is illegal. You know, if you're caught as a spy in another country, that's illegal, and they'll PNG you, persona non grata. They'll kick you out of the country. They may arrest you and throw you into jail. So that is part of the nature of the spy game, where everything you're doing in a foreign country is illegal. So a lot of times handlers can be here and have their assets overseas. And the same thing goes for foreign countries. They can be tasked through encrypted email, proton mail, whatever you want to use, whatever your technique is for communicating with your source. You can use that from a foreign country. These people have already been co-opted or are working willingly for various reasons, whether it's revenge, political ideology, money, so they just need to be told what to do and what taskings to have, and off they go. They're off to the races. So I hope that answers your question.
All right. All right. Now this question is coming from one of our board members at a federal research laboratory. So that context, if much of the research that they're conducting is open science and meant to be published,
Yep.
how and when would they be deciding when their activities might be of interest to a foreign entity? And
okay, there are countries that publish what they're interested in. In particular, the Chinese government publishes a 5-year plan every 5 years and says, we want to be #1 in the world in this particular area: artificial intelligence, quantum, coal technology, nuclear technology, cybersecurity. And you look at that, and if all of a sudden they say something like electric cars, and I'm making this up, all of a sudden you're like, hey, I have this research I've been doing into electric cars at this federal facility. It's unclassified. A lot of it's open source. A lot of it's peer reviewed by my colleagues. But all of a sudden it becomes important to other countries, to foreign intelligence agencies, and it becomes important to our government. So I can see electric cars, drone technology, stuff like that becoming more classified in different areas. Certainly little kids have drones, but around the neighborhood, but you can certainly see some of that technology becoming classified in the future. So when I talk to people about developing intellectual capital and intellectual property, if you want to use that term, then I often talk about, well, at some point it's all unclassified now, it's peer reviewed, it's open source, it's published, but at some point in the future that can change. And certainly towards your questions, other countries let us know what they're interested in. And oftentimes they're interested in the same things we are. So that's the nature of the game.
all right, we have some real thoughtful questions coming in here. So I'm keeping an eye on time, but so think of this. Wow, I don't know how you might answer this quickly, but I want to ask this one from one of the guests. Arguably, we're undergoing an information revolution. So do you see historical similarities to the Industrial Revolution regarding patents and international laws that were disregarded by the Russian Union under Lenin? That's one theme. And then from the same guest, I like the second question. Their observation from visiting China is that they'll copy anything, whether it's good or bad, probably figure it out later how valuable it is. Would there be attempts to send the PRC on a quote wild goose chase and to a point that it may longer pay for them to invest in stealing technology and ideas? They seem to be quite a vacuum cleaner, at least from what I read. And so I wonder, they might have a massive capacity.
Okay, that's quite an onion to peel back. But let's start with the Russian Revolution. From my perspective, я понимаю по-русски не очень хорошо, долго немного. I don't speak Russian very well, is what I'm saying. So with regard to the revolution, I see parallels more closer to the American Revolution. I think it was Francis Cabot Lowell, who was one of our first economic spies. For those of you who are students of history, Francis Cabot Lowell was the city of Lowell, my hometown, Lowell, Massachusetts, was named after him. And he had gone to England to steal the designs for the cotton mill and to make cloth, and basically started the textile industry in New England. So expensive textiles, used to have to buy them from England. He developed them with all the water power that we have here on the Merrimack River and throughout New England, and created the textile industry, which made cloth cheaper for people here after the Revolutionary War. So an early practitioner and early adopter of economic espionage. So it's something that's going on Russia, historically here in this country. So those are the historical similarities I see with regards to patents and international laws being disregarded. It just happens everywhere. Specific to the Russian Revolution, I imagine it's of a similar ilk, not being a complete student of that period in time. With regards to another part of that long question, will China copy anything? I can't definitively say yes to that, but they do take a great deal of information from this country, as evidenced by the thousands of cases we currently have with regards to technology transfer. Every single office in the FBI has multiple cases on technology transfer matters revolving the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party in particular, as well as other countries around the world. So will they copy good plus bad? I can't necessarily answer that question. However, I will say that there is talk going about throughout the cyber industry about using a concept called deception. And deception is, when they generally talk about that, they talk about computer systems deceiving cyber spies into thinking that they are in a system, but they are really in a synthetic system. So they think they're hacking IBM, but it is really a computer system designed to look like IBM. And they are using this, it's coming out. There are a lot of Israeli companies that work in the deception realm, relatively few in this country, but it is an idea that is coming forth as another layer of cybersecurity, where we put out false information for people to steal, if they're so inclined, false information for other governments to hack their way towards, in order to kind of muddy the waters out there in the cyber realm. And so maybe that falls under hacking good and bad. That might be something that we see more of in the future, but that's a more up-to-date technology that specifically is looking to lure people in, or to, rather than hack my real website, hack the fake website. And so it just mitigates some of the damage, or waters down some of the information that can be obtained by our foreign adversaries. So I offer that out there for your consideration.
All right, I wonder, there's two questions that, if you could do them in about a minute. One was, a person was interested in the Med Robotics case and noted that actually the charges ended up being dropped, and wondered if, what percentage of charges tend to result in convictions? If you could speak to that.
Yeah, for the FBI, our conviction rate in all crimes is very high. Our standards, specifically in these types of cases, are very high. If the FBI is coming into your office, you're in trouble. And we don't lose a lot of cases. And what's interesting about this, you talk about the Med Robotics case. This is a guy who walks in, has a bunch of laptops, and maybe nothing else on them. And if he doesn't confess, then what do you charge him with? Was he hacking the system? Is he charged with trespassing? It's not a federal crime to trespass. So what do you really charge him with? Now, we believe we know what he was doing. There was no other reason to be there. He had been seen there on the property 6 months earlier by one of the landscapers who goes, "Oh yeah, I recognize that guy," once he saw his picture in the paper. Yeah, he was here 6 months ago. So there's nothing, you have to drop the charges, maybe because you don't have a case, but you stopped him from doing his nefarious activity. I hope that answers everything. They're not all winners, but once the FBI gets into you, it's difficult to get out of it. Because the proof, when we talk about probable cause, our level of proof is a lot of probable cause. We don't fish around. And some people may get that impression, but it has not been my personal experience over 25 years.
Okay. Do you have 2 minutes to answer one more question specific to user facilities here? And thank you, everyone. We don't like to go over and respect your time, but we'll ask one more. And yes, a few people have checked and asked. We will be recording this. It will be made available. So the questions regarding user facility where, because of COVID, many of the researchers that used to travel from overseas, were reduced or otherwise prohibited from being able to do so to visit the facilities now. And the person's asking, I imagine overseas bad actors are having to invest more in cybercrime now with COVID as a consequence with restricted travel. Could you comment on how much cyber crimes increased recently? And what type of cyber security issues are perhaps facing facilities who have that much more of inquiry and data access requests, et cetera, happening online as opposed to in person?
Yeah, cybersecurity is it's becoming a massive field. Way back when I was a coder, earlier on in my graduate career, prior to joining the Bureau, we would just code, and security wasn't even a consideration. We just needed to get the results from the data, and we were coding. And as time has gone on, cybersecurity has become an area of research. It's become its own animal over the years, certainly. And we are just catching up to the fact in the last 5 or 10 years that security needs to be probably part of the development process, where before, even now I look at my family members who are involved in software development, and the impetus is to get the code out there, and we'll worry about most of the bugs later. And that is still out there because people want to make money. But now you're seeing President Biden's executive order regarding putting code out that's you can back up, that you can putting out an order that that there needs to be a greater effort towards cybersecurity, and you can read that as it develops, and it's still, I believe, is in the developmental stage. The Department of Homeland Security is moving to regulate cybersecurity in pipelines, obviously after the Colonial attack, certainly, but you'll see DHS delving more into cybersecurity, along with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. CISA is 2 to 3 years old, 2.5 years old, and they are becoming the forefront of cybersecurity outreach in the United States. It is becoming a bigger and bigger deal all the time. Having said all of that, there is such a huge attack surface out there with regard to cyberspace, and the barriers to entry are very low, and the risks are very small. That's why cybercrime has increased. That's why cyber-espionage has increased over the years. So can you imagine that bad actors will invest more in cybercrime? Oh yeah, so can I. Exactly because the cost is low and the barriers to entry are low. and it's so much, you can get so much more information from a computer than you can from a person. Having said that, regular good old-fashioned espionage isn't going to go away. We still have spies in our country. That isn't going to go away anytime soon, if ever. But the emphasis on cybercrime, the emphasis on cybersecurity and making security a bigger part of the development process when working with software, that is certainly going to increase as time goes on. So I hope I hit every part of that question.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Then we will end on that answer. There are a few people who've asked some questions, and is it okay if we share your contact information?
Yeah, email me.
I have your email address.
But I would suggest, so I'm not inundated with emails, honestly, reach out to your local FBI. If you're in the Boston area or New England, call me. And please feel free to share my email. But this is a good opportunity for you to do some liaison with your local FBI and say, hey, I was watching the guy from Boston do a presentation. Can you do something similar at my company, at my organization, at my school? They're certainly out in Buffalo. We're everywhere. So around this country. So reach out and make that effort to reach out to the private sector coordinator, who will be generally their FBI agents at your local FBI. And they have similar experience to me.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a couple specific introductions. I see your note, Mr. Oram, who's on the call with the National Science Foundation, had a cybersecurity question, would like to connect with you, and I can make that introduction on the side. And
Fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. Then thank you, Scott, very much for this.
Hey,
detail.
I greatly appreciate the
This will
opportunity.
be recorded, as we said. We'll share this, and your time and insight's been really fascinating, as we hoped would spur some additional conversations amongst our network, and we'll look forward to building on those with the insight you've provided. Thank you, everyone. For more information on SURF's next events, actually, we have one regarding a webinar regarding ORCID IDs. That's next Tuesday, June 1st. Check on our websites, or hopefully you would have seen that in the same invite for this one. But Scott, this has been really helpful, and thanks, everyone. I'm Dan Powers, Executive Director of the Society for Science at User Research Facilities. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay.